We'll just give it 15 seconds just to check that it's working. Okay, I think we're live. So welcome to everyone on the call. Welcome to anybody on YouTube. So this is a Socratic seminar on like Taproot rollout or Taproot support post activation in November. So today we're going to be discussing like Taproot support post-activation in November. If there's some developers on the call or people working on particular projects, hopefully we'll be able to discuss some of the challenges or gotchas in terms of rolling out Taproot support, like gauging where we're at in terms of like whether people are actually thinking about this for their like developer roadmaps in their businesses, in their companies, on their open source projects. Everyone should know that activation is in November, block height 709.632, and that's a few months away, so there's no rush, but it's a good time kind of before the summer holidays to be discussing like plans for rolling this out. In terms of like etiquette for this call, there's a number of people joining the call. So if you look on the bottom of your Zoom call, there should be a reactions emoticon. If you click that, you'll be able to raise your hand, and I'll come to you as quickly as I can once the speaker, the current speakers stop talking. So feel free to raise your hand at any point. If you have a comment, if you have a question, if anything's unclear, please use that raise hand function and we'll come to you. We do want this like to be a discussion rather than like me or someone else just droning on. So yeah, we'll start with intros. Let's test this like hand raise feature. Anybody who'd like to do an intro, who you are, either name or pseudonym's fine, and also like what project or what company you're either contributing to or what software you're using in terms of like what you're interested in for what projects and what businesses support Taproot once November comes around. So yeah, can I have some volunteers for hand raises? The hand raise function works, right? I'm not seeing any hands. Anybody? Oh, I see a hand. Excellent. So I'll go to Oscar first, intro. Anyone else that wants to do an intro, raise your hand and I'll come to you next. Go for it, Oscar.
Hi all, thank you, Michael. Just to test the functionality, really, I'm here out of curiosity and interest, catch up on the news, follow the format, get more accustomed to it for future meetings.
Cool, thanks, Oscar. Go to Ibex London.
Hi, hello, my name is Alex. I don't work for any company or do anything. I just wanted to come in and listen and see what's happening. I don't know, I hope to see the upgrade in more wallets, even though I think that's not going to happen so fast. So, yeah.
Cool, we'll get into that later. You might have to turn your volume up a bit, Alex, you're a bit quiet. Any more hands for intros? Aaron, you had your hand up, right? Go to Aaron.
Yeah, just for testing. But yeah, I'm Aaron from Willem. I work for Bitcoin Magazine. So I'm tuning in to see what's going on over here.
Cool, thanks, Aaron. Anybody else? We're doing intros. Raise your hand if you want to do an intro. Especially if, I don't know if we've got anybody on the call who's like working on, working for a business or working for like an open source project that is like considering supporting Taproot in November or starting to think about it? We'll go to Craig Raw next.
Hi there, I'm Craig Raw, developer of Sparrow Wallet. I've recently been integrating single key Taproot in. So I guess I'm just here on the call, having done that work sort of on my own. Quite interested just to hear what the progress of the greater community is on it, and yeah, just to kind of get some feedback perhaps.
Awesome. Can I just ask, like, how was that process? Was it pretty easy to do, or did it require looking up loads of stuff? Did you look at how Core's implemented it, or just did it yourself?
I pretty much followed the BIPs, which I didn't find particularly easy to read. I also referred to the Optech Taproot workshop, which is a little bit out of date, but there is a PR that updates it to 0.21. So I followed that, but the workshop is not exactly what is in the BIPs either. So it wasn't the easiest process, I must admit, but I do think all the information is out there. It's just, it can be a little bit difficult to piece it all together.
Awesome, that's really good feedback. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, those Optech workshops, I can post a link. They're really good, but yes, they were done a year and a half ago, so maybe there are a few details that are out of date, or slight changes that weren't implemented in terms of the Optech workshops. We've got Luke saying, can you propose changes to the BIP to make them easier to work with? I don't know. Do you want to speak, Luke? I don't know what you mean by that. Do you mean the Taproot BIPs, maybe?
Yeah, he was saying he was needing help besides what was in the BIP. So it might make sense to clarify what goes in the BIPs so that it's easier for other people to work with, and they're in the same situation.
Yeah, what are your thoughts in terms of like changing the BIPs? It's kind of dangerous to do it. I suppose if it's like guidance for users, then it's not really a problem, right?
Well, the
like
purpose of the BIPs is that people can read them and understand how to work with it. So if it's not accomplishing that, then I don't know what's missing, but sounds like something could be added there to make it clear, or whatever was missing for him.
Yeah, okay, good point. So yeah, Craig, after this, if there's anything in the BIPs you don't like, then perhaps consider opening a PR.
Well, yeah, I think,
cool.
Sorry, the BIPs are, rich. It all depends on what background you've had coming into them, and that's obviously a difficult thing to kind of assume everyone's background reading them for the first time. So, I didn't have a particular issue with the BIPs. They are quite dense, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. I just think we perhaps need more accompanying material that can assist with explaining them. And obviously, as the support grows and as the amount of code written grows, you have more reference points, where there aren't that many at this point.
Yeah, good point. It is still early. Like in terms of like Segwit time, we're still like what, mid 2017. I'm always trying to like think where we are in terms of Segwit and comparing to Segwit. And I've got a section later where we'll talk about like some of the lessons in terms of why like Segwit rollout and Segwit adoption is so slow. Andrew says in the chat the BIPs are pretty dense, so it can be easy to miss things. Anybody else want to do an intro? If you do want to do an intro, there's a reactions emoticon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click the hand raise button, then I'll go to you. But just to test it, just so that you know how to raise your hand. I'm not seeing any raised hands. No. Okay. I don't think anyone else wants to do intros. So we'll move to the reading list. We don't have to stick to this rigidly, but just to give some structure. As I said, please raise that hand and comment questions at any point. It looks like we've got quite a few core developers on the call, which is great. So anything core related, we've got covered, it appears. Let me share my screen. Okay, so I should be screen sharing. That's working. Okay, so this is the reading list that I put together. YouTube link, Zoom link, Meetup link. We did have a Scratic last year discussing like the design of BIP Schnorr and BIP Taproot. So there's transcripts and videos from like June, July last year. Anybody who's like a bit unclear on like the details, some of that discussion might be helpful. Obviously, there's the BIPs and other resources, and hopefully there'll be a lot more resources coming out to help people like Craig implement this. I thought we'd recap like the minor signaling. So just very briefly, as I said, activation in November. We had the Taproot Watch site that was great in terms of being able to monitor like which mining pools were signaling, and that seemed to get a lot of attention like on social media, etc. I also thought that it was great that I was really impressed by some of the mining pools. Like pretty much everyone did a good job in terms of signaling pretty speedily and reaching that 90% threshold pretty fast. Like special shout outs to Slushpool, who signaled, well, the first mining pool to signal, and they put out a ton of like blog posts and went on podcasts like discussing activation. And I thought that was really impressive. Also, Alejandro of Poolin did the podcast scene discussing like the challenges of a mining pool signaling, and they had a few issues. They weren't as fast off the tracks as Slushpool, but I thought he did a really great job discussing miner signaling, and he had the Taproot activation site. So it was cool that they're like, I hope going into activation November that this aspect of like technical competence and like staying up to date with like the latest features and latest things to be rolling out, and like user interest in terms of what changes are available, not just miners, but exchanges, wallets, hardware wallets, etc. I hope that like momentum continues, because that'll be really cool, and that will give us like a head start in terms of getting like Taproot rolled out across products and companies and across the community. So yeah, Alejandro did the podcast scene, and then Peter had this tweet thread where he said, like, this is just the beginning. The real work will be the ecosystem of wallets and other applications adopting changes to make use of Taproot. So yeah, this is just the beginning, even though we've got it activated. And hopefully this call might play a small part in getting people like thinking about it and discussing it well in advance of November. So any thoughts? Any thoughts on the miner signaling part? I'll stop sharing briefly. If you raise your hand, any thoughts on miner signaling? Not seeing anyone. Okay, we'll move on. So let's try and get a bit of interaction, because I feel as if I'm droning on. Any particular Taproot uses people are excited about? Let's go to Aaron, who's got his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit late with my hand, but I think an interesting point about miner signaling is just the question, what is it for? Because there seem to be different perspective on what the actual purpose of miner signaling is. Is it purely a technical thing? Is it purely something to trigger nodes into thinking that, you know, into starting to enforce the rules? or is it also some sort of social signal to users that there are going to be new rules? So just as an overall question, I think there are different perspectives of what is minor signaling actually for ultimately. And I was wondering if people have thoughts about that. What is the purpose of minor signaling?
Let's go to Luke. Happy to answer that question, Luke. No, not hearing Luke. Let's go to Andrew Chow.
Yeah, I guess we use minor signaling as a coordination mechanism because it's easy to measure, right? It's hard to measure whether users are upgrading. It's hard to measure whether nodes are upgrading, but it's really easy to measure whether miners seem to want the soft fork, and that's why we use minor signaling. At least as a first step, because it's easy to measure. For further steps, we haven't really gotten there yet, so that is, I guess, up to debate.
Minor signaling is rather the last step, and it doesn't really matter what miners want, so that's not its purpose for sure. The purpose is to have something concrete on chain that says this chain has those rules. So the users that want it know to activate it, and the users that don't want it know they have to fork off if they don't want it.
And I think your point, Luke, is that like miners mining pools should have reviewed the BIP well in advance of signaling. So like if they're unhappy with it, the time of signaling is not the point to raise that opposition or raise that criticism. It's well in advance of any activation.
I would say that Luke's point is more that minor signaling is the coordination mechanism, but they should only be signaling when it's clear that the community wants the soft fork to activate, right?
I mean, if that isn't clear, there shouldn't be any signaling at all.
Right. So it's kind of like there shouldn't be any signaling at all if there's not consensus on the soft fork.
It has to be consensus.
But if the miners and mining pools are signaling, not only does that mean because they're signaling that there's consensus on the soft fork, but also that they're signaling readiness for that soft fork to be activated. But it will be interesting. Like there seems to be a lot of churn and a lot of changes like in the mining community. So perhaps like in November, the mining pool like breakdown would be totally different than it was when the signaling actually happened. So I don't know if there's anything to come of that. Hopefully it will go smoothly and swimmingly, and miners will enforce the Taproot rules on that block, and there won't be any disruption. But okay, any other things on minor signaling? Otherwise we move on. I didn't want to spend the whole session on minor signaling, given that we're over the hump. I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, so yeah, let's go to Taproot uses, and especially people who haven't spoken before. If there's any particular uses of Taproot they're interested in, let's start with like what does Taproot offer us? Let's go to Ibex London. What does Taproot offer us? Why we bothered?
I have a new question before this. Actually, I don't know how to answer this question. So there was this whole thing with signature aggregation and cross-signature input aggregation, and I'm still confused about that because I thought that the whole thing with Schnorr is that you can add signatures, right? And doesn't that mean aggregation? So can someone clarify what does it mean? Everything. What does it mean? Cross signature. What is the other type of aggregation, and why is that actually not here? And how is it going to be added? And also, what is that going to be used for?
Cool. Thanks. We'll go to Andrew.
So, signature aggregation is basically the ability to take multiple signatures and combine them into a single signature. Cross-input signature aggregation would be to do that across the inputs in your transaction. So if you have like 5 inputs, instead of having 5, if you have 5 single signature inputs, instead of having 5 signatures in your transaction, you would have 1 signature. Taproot doesn't implement this. I haven't seen any concrete proposals to do this yet because this would require significant changes to the transaction format. But signature aggregation itself is something that that Schnorr signatures provide because of the linearity properties of the signature. So if you have a multisig inside it's a single input, you could then do signature aggregation with something like musig, where you also do key aggregation. So instead of having, so if you have like a 2 of 2 multisig, instead of what we do now, whereas you put 2 keys and then 2 signatures, you would combine the 2 keys into 1 key and combine the 2 signatures into 1 signature. So it becomes 1 key and 1 signature. So that's like signature aggregation in general, is combining signatures. Key aggregation is combining keys. And then, yeah, it gets more complicated from there.
So then the cross input one is just the meme. That's just it.
Yeah, it's something that people want, and it's something that we thought we could do with Taproot, and it's something that you can do with Schnorr signatures in general, like signature aggregation, but it's not happening because it would require significantly more engineering work and more changes to the transaction format. And I think people want Taproot, like the Taproot changes sooner rather than later. Doing cross-input signature aggregation would put a several-year-long delay on that.
So if we would want to get this, would this also require a soft fork or something, or could it, or like how would this be done?
It would require some kind of fork because you would need to change the transaction format. Maybe there's some trick that we could do similar to Segwit where we add on more data to the transaction format. But this is something that still needs to be worked out. I don't think there have been any solid technical proposals for this yet.
There's no reason that we couldn't just have a new witness version and just have the signature only in the very last one or the very first one, right?
I think that would, yeah, that would probably work.
I mean, it wouldn't combine the keys, but there's not much you can do at that point to combine the keys.
Yeah. I mean, there might be problems around like, if you want to combine some inputs, but not other ones. I'm not sure. Like if you have like inputs 1 and 2 are one signature and 2 and 3 are, or 3 and 4 are a different signature because those are like 2 different parties or something in like a coin chain. Yeah.
I think,
but as I said, requires more thought and engineering work to actually have a concrete proposal.
Right. I just don't think it's as big a deal as Segwit would be.
I think like I would like to add that the Schnorr signatures like allow you to do basically to aggregate signatures of transactions that have Schnorr signatures like locally, but to like make the protocol more efficient, you have to make like very deep changes to the protocol, as Andrew has said. So it is possible to do it, but like to actually like utilize it in the protocol, then you have to change the protocol.
My understanding is even without the signature aggregation, it's still Taproot is still a significant improvement on the efficiency.
Right, so it's more efficient batching wise, and also hopefully the screen share is working. There's a Stack Exchange post on the difference between key aggregation and signature aggregation. So with Schnorr and Taproot, we have key aggregation, but we don't have cross-input signature aggregation. So schemes like musig and musig2 allow us to have the equivalent of a multi-sig scheme with only 1 key and 1 signature going on chain. But the signature aggregation part is like collecting a bunch of signatures and then aggregating all those signatures into one, rather than going to the chain with just a key and a signature, having done the equivalent of multi-sig scheme. So does that answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Cool. So we'll move on. Oh, so yeah, anything else that we're into, like anything else that Taproot offers us? Anybody who hasn't spoken? Let's go to Oscar. I think you'll need to unmute yourself, Oscar.
Sorry, thank you, Michael. So this is probably a silly point or question more, but based on what we were just talking about, it sounds like the hypothesis is that we're moving sort of a little bit closer towards a Mimblewimble style protocol, which the next step would then be, if I understand the maths right, something like a block cut through, where you start to be able to remove history from the ledger, thus saving disk space and bandwidth. Is that correct rationale? And is that conceivable that that would ever be interesting to a Bitcoin world?
Not seeing any hands.
I haven't
Yeah, go for
I
it.
haven't heard or seen anything proposed for Bitcoin like that yet. I think it's a lot of the talk on cross-input signature aggregation has been around making large transactions more efficient. Like, you know, you have a lot of inputs. Now we can just have one signature instead of 20 signatures and save on fees, save on block space. So now we can have more transactions in a block.
That makes sense. Thank you, Andrew.
And there's going to be a lot of discussions in terms of like future soft forks. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. Cross-input signature aggregation will definitely be a candidate. And I suppose that is a stepping stone towards this like potential Mimblewimble end goal. But yeah, I think that's a discussion for another day. But thanks for the question, Oscar.
I also like.
Yep, go for it, Fem.
I think, yeah, it's like, at least from today's perspective, it seems kind of unrealistic that this is going to come, just because on the one hand we have like we can cut off old blocks, like just do an assume valid or yeah, prune, which is also just another solution, a simpler solution to like space that you need on disk. In addition to that, there's U3XO, which is another approach that also tackles this, like how much you have to save on disk. And so, yeah, there's other approaches that seem easier to do or that are further along. So, but maybe we're thinking about it differently in like 5 years or so. But from today's perspective, it doesn't seem the most likely scenario that we'll do like block cut through. And if it does, then it will be like a big approach, like similar to like what U3XO is looking at in terms of like introducing it.
So that's kind of longer term, like many years down the line. We'll get back to the original question. What do we get with Schnorr and Taproot? Why should an exchange, a wallet, a hardware wallet be interested in implementing this? Like come November, what are they gonna gain? We'll go to Andrew.
So there's actually one other thing that Schnorr signatures provide that I don't see talked about as much, and that's batch verification. So if you have a ton of Schnorr signatures, you can verify them all in one step, basically, instead of n steps, and this really improves I guess block verification time. So if we see a lot of Taproot inputs and Taproots being adopted, blocks that contain a lot of Taproot transactions will for say a new node that's syncing and is revalidating everything, they can validate these blocks really quickly, because then all the Schnorr signatures are verified at the same time in a single step instead of individually sequentially. So this is something else that Taproot provides, and I actually haven't seen much discussion of that before.
It's kind of on the order of like, I think I saw like 40% like speed up in terms of like batch verification or something in that.
It's
if it's
quite
batch
big.
and Taproot transactions.
Yeah, I don't remember. There used to be a graph in BIP 340, and I can't find it. I think there was also a mistake in the original benchmark, and it's actually faster than what was originally stated, but I can't find my reference for this.
Okay, so yeah, batch verification is definitely great from like a network perspective. community perspective, bringing IBD time down is great. But like wallets, exchanges, hardware wallets, Lightning, what benefits are they getting? Either like instantly with activation, or once they do some work to implement some things. Let's go to Luke.
One thing I also haven't heard talked about much is that in theory, wallets will be able to do a ring signature proof of funds, so you can prove that you have money for a payment or whatever without showing the proposed recipient which funds on the chain are actually yours.
Yeah, did Jonas Nick do something like that? I might have seen a tweet.
So.
Yeah, that was cool. I
I'm
don't know
not
what he
sure
did
if anyone's actually working on a bit for that yet or not, but
yeah, that did look cool. Did he do it? Did he do it on like Elements or Liquid, or did he do it on Main?
I think he did it on Signet, and
Signet.
if I remember correctly, it mostly just looks like a cool party trick, and not something that will be usable. I'm not sure if I know he did it when he did it as a cool party trick and not something that would actually be used. But perhaps someone will work out how to actually use it and like a proper protocol around it.
right, my understanding is that this was one of the reasons that we weren't hashing the keys.
For this particular use case.
Right.
I don't think so. I think this came up afterwards. The not hashing the keys is a completely different conversation.
Okay, so I'll try and summarize. Anybody, feel free to raise your hand if you have anything to add. But so obviously Musig is a big deal for, eventually it'll be a big deal for Lightning. It'll mean with the 2 of 2, only one signature will go on chain rather than 2. And with threshold schemes, like eventually something like Liquid with its 11 to 15 could potentially be putting one signature on chain rather than 11. So these are massive space savings for multi-sig and threshold sig. So like it's kind of like longer term, but that's big. We have like, I don't know if you can see the board behind me, but like with the Taproot tree, we can have complex scripts and we can put them in the leaves of the Merkle tree. And then it's great for privacy because you only reveal one of the scripts that you're spending. And also it's great for block saving space because rather than putting a really, really long script on chain, all you need to do is prove that one of the single leaf scripts was within the tree. So that will make like complex scripts, combinations of multi-sig, time locks, etc., much more feasible in like a higher fee environment. So yeah, that's a bunch of stuff in terms of what Taproot offers us. Thank you, XeroXB10C, for sharing the link to Jonas Nick's tweet. Maybe I'll just get that out. I'll share that afterwards. Okay, so let's move on to some of the other things on the reading list. So this was a site that Jeremy put up. Like these are some of the projects that are planning to use Taproot, or just either at the idea stage or further than that, like with actual implementations. I thought we'd have a brief session if there's any interesting observations or thoughts on why Segwit adoption was so slow, and any lessons from like that period. Like I suspect like because there's not so much focus on altcoins and tokens and all this kind of stuff, and there's at least a small number of like exchanges and hardware wallets that are really interested in implementing like the latest cutting edge things that come out from core or that are available to use on the protocol. So hopefully it'll be different this time. Are there any lessons from Segwit? Anything that we shouldn't repeat this time when we try and get businesses, exchanges, open source projects to actually implement Taproot and offer the ability to send and receive pay to Taproot addresses? Any thoughts?
Well, aside from Lightning wallets, there was no reason for wallets to receive with Segwit. That's not quite the case with Taproot.
There were fee savings though, right, Luke? Like with Segwit, like with the discount.
Right, but it was at an expense of the network, so it's actually harming.
Yeah. It depends whether you're like looking at it from a network blockchain perspective. Luke takes the view that that kind of allowed for like bigger blocks, and so longer IBD initial blockchain download times. But in terms of like a user who doesn't care about the network and doesn't care about the chain, they did actually receive fee discounts if they use Segwit. And that incentive or motivation to use Segwit doesn't apply as much to Taproot, so perhaps it's going to be harder to get Taproot adoption than Segwit adoption, but we'll go to Andrew.
I think a lot of the delay in getting exchanges and other wallets to support Segwit was just due to the complexity of Segwit, right? Because Segwit changed the transaction format, introduced a completely new address format, and implementing all of this is a considerable effort. So I think that is what that like is a significant factor in why Segwit's rollout was so slow. But with Taproot, transaction format stays the same. Address format changes a little bit, but it's almost identical to Bash32. So that doesn't really change. And a lot of code that was written for Segwit can be reused in Taproot. So like the Taproot things that need to be implemented are Schnorr signatures and the whole Taproot tree thing, which is, that's complex, but I don't think it's not as complex as all of the things that Segwit did. So I think Taproot will probably have better adoption or faster rollout.
Yeah, cool. Here's hoping. Fingers crossed. Let's go to Fabian.
Yeah, I think Segwit showed that like the fee savings weren't like that big of an argument for many like exchanges that are putting most of the transactions on chain. And so I think that's not like such a huge factor, probably again, even since the effect is even lower. But then Taproot has this privacy effect. And so I think it's, I can't really give a prediction, but it's just going to be interesting to see like how many, like which actors, I mean, it's going to be somewhat easy to tell like which project go into that direction and implement it first. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting, like how much of a pull the privacy aspect has versus the fee aspect that wasn't that big for Segwit.
Yeah, thanks, Fabian. Luke, do you want to? Let's go to Craig, and then we'll go to Luke afterwards. Go to Craig first.
I'd actually just like to disagree with Andrew a little there. Having implemented both, I suspect that I found Taproot actually the harder of the two to implement. It's just, maybe it's, as I was saying earlier, that the BIPs are quite dense and it's quite difficult to, you have to sort of refer to all three of them to understand what's going on. But, certainly I think that unless we get quite a bit more sort of entry-level material around Taproot implementation, it might be a while before we see a lot of other wallets folding it in.
Cool, thanks, Craig. Luke says in the comments, he thinks Taproot provides more benefits than Segwit, so there's more incentive for switching to it. I would challenge that by saying, if you're using multisig or complex scripts, then there is more the greater incentive. Like, there's an Optech link that will go over whether that incentive exists if you're just doing simple like one-of-one pub key spends. But go for it.
Better for the network, and you get the privacy improvements either way. I think overall it's more incentive for more people to adopt Taproot than there was for Segwit, even if the fee difference isn't as big.
Yeah, I think your focus, which is good because you're a core developer, is like always on the network and like making sure the network is as healthy as possible. But some like users and exchanges obviously don't have that perspective, or just purely be looking at this from like what does this give me from a selfish perspective. But yeah, we need both types of people. It's great we have people like Luke thinking like that. Any other comments? Not seeing any hands. Okay, let's move on to some more links then. So yeah, so this was so obviously during Segwit there were tons of resources being produced. These are a bunch of resources Optech put together for Batch 32, which was Segwit 2017. So I think Craig's point that there are a lot more resources to help people with Segwit is certainly a fair one. Hopefully we'll get more and more resources like as the weeks and months go by up until November. So this is a site, this is Bitcoin Wiki. So Merch is actually tracking which wallets, which implementations, hardware wallets, web wallets, exchanges. I think he's trying to contact them and explorers and see like what their plans are, and whether they'll be supporting Taproot to some extent in November or perhaps later. Any comments on this? Has anyone looked through this wiki that Merch has put together? See any hands? No. Okay, we'll move on. So we do have 0xB10C here. So let's discuss your site, what it currently tracks, if you're there, 0xB10C. Like how you've built it and what you plan to like support going forward up until the activation and beyond. Go for it.
Okay, so yeah, well, my site does support Taproot outputs and inputs, both key pairs and script pair spends. For now, of course, there aren't any spends yet, but there are some outputs, as you can see on screen. And I think half of them are from actually testing sent to witness version 1 batch 32 addresses. Sometime around last year, there was a thread on the mailing list where Peter sent out an interest, and I think half of the outputs, half of the 6 outputs that exist to pay to Taproot are from that, and some others are from some other people experimenting. Yeah, and of course these are at the moment anyone can spend. Yeah, right, Luke. If you have connections to a mining pool, these are spendable. Supplying an empty witness. Yeah. Any questions on this side or?
Any questions on this site? So I'll ask one if there's no one else. So yeah, I think I asked you this on master on social media or something. Like, are you planning to do the same graphs for like Signet and testnet? Because hopefully we'll see a bunch of people playing and experimenting with Taproot transactions in the run-up to November.
So I did look at Signet and testnet recently, and was really surprised by the like on Signet, Taproot has been active for, I think, the whole existence, or at least since its release of Bitcoin Core was Signet implemented. And I think there were like 20 key pairs spans and 5 script pair spans. So not much experimentation done on Signet. And there were like 20 or so key pair spans on testnet sometime like last week or so. Some people pay to Taproot outputs, but not much experimentation done yet. But if there is like need for it, or if people want it, we can of course support a Signet or a testnet version of the site as well.
Cool. Any more thoughts on that site? I don't know if, like, so obviously we'd want, if you're looking like through all the different like parties or constituents or projects in the space, like you'd want blockchain explorers to be supporting Taproot basically from activation. So that seems to be like, if you had to think about projects that would be a priority, like you'd want blockchain explorers, you'd want to be able to look up your Taproot transactions immediately from activation in November. Luke says in the chat, block explorers are disinformation. Yes, I'm sure Explorer will support, I think Explorer supports Signet and testnet Taproot transactions now, and I'm sure it will do mainnet in November. I don't know of some of the other ones. There's a conversation in the chat about the outputs that are currently on mainnet, the Taproot outputs. So Luke asks, are these trivially stealable? And Andrew said, yes, they are trivially stealable. I'm surprised they haven't been stolen yet. So that was one thing. I did listen to your podcast, Andrew, with Stefan Rivera that just came out the last couple of days. And you said, like, a lot of people have been trying with their wallets to send Bitcoin to mainnet, like Taproot addresses. And some of them failed, some of them succeeded, and some of them like just locked up their funds, so they couldn't even spend them with anyone can spend. Do you know what happened there?
Yeah, so there's an old, well, not that old. There's a mailing list post from November-ish where this testing was happening. I think Schmitty had a big summary of every wallet that he tested and the result. And there were some wallets that sent successfully. Also, these were to these used a Besh32 address, not Besh32M. This was before Besh32M was finalized. So some of them sent successfully and made a Segwit v1 output. Some of them failed to parse the address. Some of them failed to make the transaction. Like, they accepted the address, but something else down the line failed, and so the transaction wasn't made. And then some of them made a Segwit v0 address, which means that the coins are now burnt. So there's B10C posted the link to the mailing list post. So yeah, there are some, as we saw on the website, there are some Taproot outputs out there, and there are some that should have been Taproot outputs but aren't.
Okay, cool. So I see. So they sent them to Betch32 Taproot addresses rather than Betch32M Taproot addresses, and the Betch32 Taproot addresses can't be spent. Is that right? Is that why they're locked up forever?
Well, so Betch32 and Betch32M look on the blockchain, it's still a similar like Segwit style script pub key. It's just the display to the user that's different. It's that Segwit is v0 and Taproot is v1. So the address that it uses is supposed to make a v1 output, but some wallets made a v0 output instead of v1, and that's incorrect. This was part of the motivation for switching to Best32M because several wallets were doing it wrong. And so then it's okay to introduce another address format.
Gotcha. So I'm not seeing any hands, so we'll move on. I think we should go to, so we've got some links on the reading list on Best32 and Best32M. So let's go to them. So yeah, so this is what a Best32 address looks like. I'm sure everyone's seen this, BC1. So like the Q stands for like Segwit version 0. And so a mainnet Best32M address will have that BC1 with a P instead of the Q. But otherwise will look similar to that. And then obviously if you play around with SIGNet and testnet recently activated a few days ago. So Taproot is active on both testnet and SIGNet and obviously regtest. And the address will start TB1 for testnet and SIGNet. And there'll still be that P because that P stands for the witness version 1. So I think that like, in terms of like the first thing an exchange or a hardware wallet would think about doing in the run up to November is allowing the wallet to send to Taproot addresses, like P to TR Taproot addresses. That would be the first step, I think. Like if we imagined ourselves to be an exchange or wallet, do you agree with that? Any hands? So Craig, were you still here? Like, was the first thing you did to add the ability to send to a PTTR address?
Yes, it was. Yes, that was the first thing that I built in, and then I worked on the receiving part afterwards.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that's the Best32 address. The Best32M is pretty similar, just the checksum is different. And this link is explaining what the problems were with Best32 and why we've gone to Best32M. So that part shouldn't be too hard for implementers. I think this is one of the first gotchas. Andrew talked about, I think he talked about this on the Stefan podcast. So there's kind of like, if you think back to the diagram I had before with the key path and the script path, if you just want to use the key path and you don't want the script path, or vice versa, if you just want the script path or the key path, there's a potential gotcha here. Just go to the right link. So yeah, how do I construct a P2TR address if I just want to use the key path? Andrew, can you explain like the potential gotcha here? Because the public key isn't the one going into the descriptor, right? Like there's all like the guidance is to always tweak it, even if you don't actually want to use the script path. The guidance is to tweak that like key path public key by something.
Yeah, so
Andrew, go for it.
So Taproot, the general construction is you have an internal key and then you have your script path tree. And to make the Taproot output, which is also the output pub key, you take the internal key and you tweak it with the hash of the I guess you just tweak it with a Merkle root, something to that effect. But if you don't have a script path, what do you tweak it with? Well, the naive thing would be you just put the internal key as the output key, but that's not what the BIPs recommend. Instead, they recommend that you tweak the internal key by the hash of itself. If you don't read the BIPs carefully, you might miss this. I think it's mentioned once. There's like one sentence that says that. And I definitely missed it when I was going through the BIP for reviewing the Taproot code. But yeah, so if you are doing key path spends, you should do this tweaking, tweak the internal key with the hash of itself, rather than putting the internal key as the output key of the Taproot output.
Does that make sense to everyone? Any hands? Not seeing any hands. So I'm assuming that everyone understands that. Let's go to Craig.
I'm interested to hear you use the word should there, Andrew. Surely the requirement is must, otherwise, or is that just, you know, sort of a best practice? Because you obviously won't be able to meet the text vectors you've put into BIP 86 unless you do that.
Right. So BIP 86 and says must, so that you meet the task vectors. But BIP 341, I think, only says should, because you can't verify whether this was actually done. So as when my node receives your transaction, I can't tell whether you did this tweak of the internal key even after you spend it. And frankly, for my node, it doesn't matter whether you did or did not. So that's where you should do this as the wallet software, but it's not must because it can't be enforced.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, it's guidance rather than like literally this will be rejected by the consensus rules if you don't do this. So people can do it without the tweak. It's just recommended not to.
Right.
Would that be correct wording?
Yeah. And also BIP 86 says must because we need it for compatibility. So everyone who uses BIP 86 has to do exactly the same thing, which means doing this tweak so that they can generate the same addresses. But if you're not doing that for whatever reason, you don't have to, but you probably should.
Okay. Any comments, questions? So go on to, so like this is the flip side. This is if you don't want to use the key path and you just want to use a single script path or multiple script paths, but you don't want that key path option. And the BIP instructs you to use a particular point, internal key, but you can change that key. So again, Andrew, are we like in a similar space where it's like, this is the guidance, you should follow this guidance, but the consensus rules won't reject your transaction if you do something slightly different? I mean, you're going to need some sort of internal. So this is the eliminating the key path, right? And in BIP 341, you have to pick an internal key with an unknown discrete logarithm to like slot into the key path.
Yeah. So so if you don't want the key path spend, because BIP 341 still requires an internal key to do the tweak against, your internal key needs to be one just known as a nums number, nothing up my sleeve number. It's just a pub key that no one knows the private key for. This could be, I mean, it could be the hash of something. It could just be a random number. It could be, I don't know, anything you want. It just needs to be something that no one knows the discrete log of, or no one knows the private key of, in order to not have a key path spend.
And so the problem that you're concerned about here is there being a hidden assuming you don't want the key path spend, you want to make sure that there isn't a hidden key path spend. And if you just want the key path and you don't want the script path, you want to ensure that there's not a hidden script path, right? So both of those are the challenges that you want to make sure you're ticking off. Any thoughts on key path, script path, using one or the other? I'm not seeing any hands. Does that make sense to everyone? Is this obvious to everyone? Okay, so any responses? Let's move on. So that was just using this key path and script path. So this was a really good post. Bitcoin Optech has done, like, it's doing a series. I don't know if the series is finished or if it's continuing, but they're doing a series in terms of like preparing for Taproot. And this is what we kind of alluded to earlier, where it's like, is Taproot worth it for single sig? And Luke was saying, well, it is, because it brings the network the benefit. But in terms of like from a selfish, like individual exchange or individual like wallet, hardware wallet provider, the benefit is pretty small in terms of fee savings. And that small benefit accrues to the spender. So there's like some figures here that Optech have done in terms of comparing like the VByte size of Taproot with like Segwit V0. Does anyone have any thoughts, questions, comments on that? I mean, this is going to the crux of what we're discussing, like whether there is that incentive for like perhaps an exchange or a wallet or a hardware wallet is just doing single sig, and like is there that incentive for them from a selfish perspective to make sure that they're ready and have pay to Taproot address support in November? Any thoughts? Seeing any hands? Is this all making sense? Aaron, are you still there?
Yeah.
Is this stuff you already knew, or is this making sense?
Well, I'm here, but I wasn't listening for the past minute or so.
Okay, no problem.
I'm the wrong person to ask.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, let's move on. So let's Taproot worth it with single sig. So descriptors. Let's discuss descriptors, because Andrew can tell us better than I can. But like the core wallet is took a long time to support Segwit back in 2017, and now Andrew's done like the heavy lifting of moving the core wallet to use descriptors instead. Like it's now means that the core wallet will be supporting at least like limited Taproot scripts in November. And that's like just due to Andrew's hard work on descriptors. I think there are some like other wallets, hardware wallets using descriptors. Now, I don't know if it's common though across the ecosystem, and like whether it's going to be tough to implement Taproot if it's not a descriptor wallet. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that?
So for core, since we're moving towards descriptors throughout as the main way the wallet handles script pub keys, Peter designed some descriptors for Taproot, and we're using, and you can use them in a descriptor wallet to get Taproot addresses. So the main thing is, because we have descriptor wallets, it was fairly easy to do this. It was basically just adding a new descriptor for Taproot, and then the existing descriptor wallet stuff could automatically handle the generation of Taproot addresses and the use of Taproot. This is in contrast to the legacy wallet, which is the wallet before Descriptor wallets, and those will not support Taproot, and it's probably non-trivial to support Taproot in the legacy wallet. I haven't looked at whether it can, because we've decided that we're not going to support Taproot with legacy wallets.
Even the Segwit stuff in the legacy wallet was kind of a hack.
Yeah, the Segwit stuff in the legacy wallet was it's not great, and it definitely took a long time for that to be implemented. Even it was like 3 or so versions after Segwit itself made it into a release.
So it's likely, given that the Descriptor wallet is the non-legacy part of the core wallet, that no one will work on supporting Taproot for the legacy wallet, right? Like you're not planning to do it, and so
yeah,
you
no,
don't know if
the
anybody
legacy
else
wallet
has
will
planned
not
to
have
do it.
Taproot support.
Okay.
So for the Descriptor wallet, right now, so in 22.0, which is going to be released soon, hopefully, there will be Taproot descriptor support, and after Taproot activates, Taproot descriptors can be imported into the Descriptor wallet. For 23, the next major release, I expect that that descriptor wallets will start making a Taproot descriptor by default, so you don't have to like enable Taproot manually.
And then Andrew or anybody else, do you know, like, what are there lots of other wallets using descriptors? So are they going to find it hard supporting Taproot if they don't currently have descriptor wallets set up now? You have any thoughts on that, Andrew?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't think supporting Taproot without descriptors would be terribly difficult. It all depends on how the wallet is structured. But at least for core, the easiest thing for us is to use descriptors. I don't know about other wallets.
Craig, like with implementing Taproot, did you use a descriptor approach or non-descriptor approach?
So Sparrow does support and use descriptors, but it doesn't directly influence the wallet itself, since when it retrieves information, it's using the Electrum server approach, which uses a hash of the script pub key. So you don't really need to worry too much about what's in it. However, I can say that, for example, libraries that Sparrow depends on, for instance, the one that it uses to connect directly to Bitcoin Core, which is the library BWT, I believe uses the legacy wallet. So that will need to upgrade to the descriptor approach to support Taproot. I can't speak to other wallets like Spectre Desktop. I'm not sure what they currently use.
Cool, thanks, Craig. Descriptors overdue for a BIP, Luke says. Well, there is a bunch of descriptor BIPs, right, Andrew? Maybe I should get them up.
There's a PR open. Feel free to assign 7 numbers for me, thanks.
Sorry, I didn't notice it yet. I'll get to that when I can.
So yeah. Yeah, we can go to the descriptor BIPs. I mean, most of them aren't Taproot, right, Andrew? So most of them are just like outlining how descriptors currently work without Taproot. There is one of the BIPs is
so there's
TR is the Taproot descriptor BIP.
So there's 7 documents. One of them describes the general philosophy and shared expressions like keys and then also the checksum. And then the other 6 describe specific descriptors. So there's one that's for non-Segwit things, so PKH and SH. There's one for the multi-sig descriptor, so multi-sorted multi. There's one for Segwit things, WPKH, WSH. There's one for Taproot. And then the other 2 are just kind of legacy kind of compatibility things. So combo descriptor and then raw and adder descriptors. And the reason there's 7 of them is so that people can say, we support these BIP numbers instead of saying we support BIP X and then have to spell out which descriptors individually. Because I think that would get really complicated versus just giving a list of numbers.
So in terms of like actual design decisions, like it's just the like everything. Most of these BIPs in the PR are just like outlining stuff that's already been agreed, right? The
Right.
new stuff. The new stuff is just the Taproot BIP.
Well, so basically all of this descriptors has been described in the Bitcoin Core repo in doc/descriptors.md. And basically I took that document and cut out pieces for each individual BIP here. So it's basically just rewording documentation that has already existed and formatting it in the form of a BIP.
Cool. So any questions on the descriptor BIPs on the call? So like we should be clear on, so like, I suppose this is going on to what core is supporting, although there's a kind of an overlap between like what core it supports and like the Taproot descriptor BIP. But like the Taproot descriptor BIP supports the Taproot script that we have behind, as long as all the leaves are 1 of 1, right? So yeah, go for it.
So Taproot descriptor. So the way that the descriptors work is that we kind of specify things generically as like, here is a script expression, and the script expression produces a script. So a Taproot descriptor can take key and script expressions and encapsulate those together as a Taproot script pub key. So right now, the only supported script expression that works inside of Taproot is for just normal pub key. So that's a pub key op check sig type thing. But there can be future script expressions that can be used inside of a Taproot context. The other ones, really the only other script expression we have that kind of makes sense is multi. But we've decided to limit this to just be like the old op check multisig method of multisig instead of overloading its meaning. So the multi descriptor cannot be used inside of Taproot, but there will probably be a different multi that uses like op check sig add or something.
Right. So you can't do. You can do the equivalent of a 1 of n if you're doing 1 of 1 on all the leaves.
Yes.
But you can't do a threshold because that would require either Musig, Merch's blog post on how to do a 2 of 3 with Musig on 2 of 2 of the leaves, or like checksig add, which would just be a normal multisig but under the Taproot rules.
Right. And these we haven't made descriptors for these yet, but if there are, once we do make such descriptors, there will be, yet another BIP for them, and it'll just be another script expression that we say can be used inside of a Taproot descriptor.
Cool.
Does multi-error properly fit within a Taproot?
Yes. So multi will, I think we've limited it to just top level or inside SH and WSH. It will, at least in core, our descriptor parser will tell you you're doing something wrong if you try multi inside of TR.
Cool. Any other questions on the bits? I've got a couple of links here. I was just like scouring the internet just to see like whether other people are using descriptors or like whether other exchanges, wallets have been discussing supporting Taproot. So I've got a couple of links here. So I did see Bitcoin Development Kit is currently using descriptors, which is promising for supporting Taproot in November. So I'm assuming they can follow some approach to what Andrew and the wallet devs have done in core. Yeah, that was a field report in Optech on what River are doing. On a blog post. I did see the Bitcoin Development Kit have also opened a PR for supporting P2 pay to Taproot addresses in November. So, I mean, it's hard. Like, I don't know if anybody on the call has been like following some of these like other projects. Like, this is more Bitcoin Development Kits in Rust. So I'm not sure if people like Andrew and Luke are following what they're doing. But any thoughts on other projects, other exchanges doing descriptor work, Taproot work? Not seeing any hands. I mean, the Miniscript part is going to be interesting. So like, there's a Rust Miniscript library and there's Peter Willer's C++ Miniscript implementation. So Miniscript will allow us to do generic scripts. So when I say before, we can do the Taproot functionality as long as there's only a 1 of 1 on the leaves of the script path. But we can't have, like, currently with the Bitcoin Core wallet anyway, we can't have threshold signatures as a leaf. And we also can't have like those complex scripts, like a combination of different time locks and multisigs, like the long scripts that we were talking about that could fit into a leaf script. So perhaps we can talk a bit about Miniscript. Any thoughts on Miniscript? Go to you, Andrew.
Miniscript is cool. I think there will be a renewed effort to review the PR for that and get it merged into core. Right now, the C++ implementation is kind of in limbo, and it's also because Miniscript is part of Bitcoin. What Peter did was copy and paste several chunks of Bitcoin core code out and use it in his C++ implementation, which means that over time they will start to diverge, and it'll be hard for these to be for one to be merged into the other. So it'd be better to get that into core so it's more easily maintained, and then we can use it.
All right, and there's this discussion between Nicholas Dorier and Peter Willer on like the work that Sony's doing. Like, so as you said, Andrew, there's a Miniscript PR to core. There's still work to do on that, and it's a bit out of date before it can get merged into core, and it doesn't support Taproot, and we'll probably need to get the Miniscript PR merged into core before we start supporting getting Miniscript to support Taproot. Anyone on the call? Everyone knows what Miniscript is, right? I'm assuming so. Craig, you're not thinking about Miniscripts. I don't think anyone can really think about Miniscript until people like Peter Willer, Andrew Polstra, Sankit have like updated Miniscript to support Taproot. I think like that's like the stepping stone we need to pass to be able to have lots of generic scripts in a Taproot tree. I don't know if anyone's going to try and implement like Taproot, complex generic Taproot scripts before that Miniscript support. Any thoughts on that?
I just think the relative education of users is frankly only just starting to get their heads around multisig. You know, anything more advanced than that just feels like a few years off. That doesn't mean we shouldn't start working on it, but as a wallet developer, you have to allocate your time to where you think users are actually going to use the features that you build. And I really love the idea of Miniscript, but I just can't see many users actually using it yet because it's not well understood to create complex scripts to lock Bitcoin and unlock it.
Thanks. So Sparrow is a multi-sig wallet, right? So like you haven't done like the multi-sig part, the supporting the like check sig add op codes that you'd need to do Taproot multisig. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I've only done single key path spins thus far. You know, I think there's quite a bit of thinking work still required to do. For instance, how do we do interactive musig? You know, how does that work if you have QR code? You know, QR capable hardware wallets. It's just not something that I think is sort of ready and easy to do today. And obviously, there's not much point in having all of the keys in your multisig just coming out of the same wallet. So that's something that I think just needs. I certainly need to give it some more thought. And I think the whole sort of industry needs to kind of start figuring out how we develop good UX around that.
All right. So, I mean, at least from my perspective, like from what I've read in the discussions of like some of the core devs, like it is going to be like those stepping stones are going to be like checksig add support in Taproot descriptors, and then musig support in either descriptors or Miniscript. I think I've got like a still to-do list for my screen. So like we have got Taproot PSBT support, but music does seem as if music 2 support does seem as if it's further down the line, like I don't know, 6 to 12 months. And so any support for multisig in Taproot is likely to be using that checksig add code rather than musig. Would you agree with that, Andrew or Luke or Fabian, any of the core developers? I haven't seen any hands. Any thoughts on timelines? No. Okay. So let's move on. So that was Miniscript. We've gone through the BIPs, the 7 BIPs that Andrew's opened. So this post, I referred to this earlier. So this is how you get a 2 of 3 using musig. When we do have musig support, you'll have like a 2 of 2 on the key path, and then 2 leaf scripts that are also 2 of 2. And so you can kind of choose which 2 keys that you want to sign, and that gets you the equivalent of 2 of 3. And that's because musig just supports multisig and not threshold sig. So there'll be schemes like Frost that will support threshold sig even further down the line than musig, but that seems a few stepping stones away, so that we can get a threshold scheme using musig. Any thoughts on musig? Cool. No. Okay, so let's move to like wrapping up. there's a few links there in terms of like Musig supporting elements. So like the code is there if you want to play around with Musig, but it's not going to be supported either in the descriptor spec or in core for a while, I suspect. And then I have some links on Lightning. Does anyone want to discuss the benefits for Taproot for Lightning? Do you have any Lightning devs on the call? Does Sparrow support Lightning, Craig?
No, it doesn't at this time. That's still coming.
Where does that, like, sorry to keep picking on you, but like one of our like non-core developers, like building a wallet, like where does, I mean, do you try and like list priorities in terms of like what would be cool for Sparrow? Like where does Lightning support sit versus like supporting paying to Taproot addresses or receiving to Taproot addresses, or like being one of the first to support Musig and all this kind of stuff? Like, is this just a jumble in your head, or are there certain things that you're really excited about implementing in Sparrow as soon as you possibly can?
Yeah, I mean, I think every wallet has its own particular focus. Sparrow is a desktop wallet. It focuses mainly on Bitcoin's store of value usage, which is why it's sort of got a strong kind of multi-sig and hardware wallet focus. Lightning is certainly something I want to support. I still think that there's some way to go before it, Lightning itself becomes mainstream. So I think I have some time there. And there's just a lot of layer one features that I believe are still interesting and worth building out at this time. So yeah, I think we all kind of, or at least many of us, I'm sure, expected fees to be higher at this point. The reality is that they aren't. And fees are ultimately what is going to drive us towards layer two. So, that situation can obviously change quite fast, but it's not the case today. So today I still focus very much on layer one and just making sure that Sparrow addresses the store of value need to the best extent that it can.
Cool, that's interesting, Greg. So yeah, so like kind of seeing how the fee environment develops. And so like if fees were going through the roof, perhaps that would completely change your priorities or things that would be high on your objective list. But with fees low, perhaps that changes where your priorities are. It's interesting. Let's go to Fabian, he's got his hands up.
Yeah, I mean, because you asked about the adoption of Lightning implementations, I think that it's a very good fit. I mean, these teams are very technically advanced, of course, and I think I haven't talked to anyone personally about this, but my feeling is they're all very excited about it and will or already started working on it probably. And so I would bet that C Lightning, LND, and Eclair will support Taproot before the first exchange will have sent the first output to Taproot output. And I mean the privacy aspect of Lightning has always been a major argument for it, and Taproot even improves that greatly. So I think it's a great fit, and I think we'll I would put my on that this is going to be the first wave of adoption of Taproot that we'll see.
Yeah, I've got on the screen. So I think Rusty's said some podcasts and some of the others, Macralo, Lalo, etc., that they'll have some Lightning. Hopefully, with COVID, they'll have some Lightning in-person protocol discussions and kind of figure out what priorities there are across the protocol. But yeah, I agree, Fabian, that you'd expect you'd expect Musig to be rolled out first on Lightning, and then perhaps later on, like point time up contracts, replacing HDLCs, etc. So there's a ton of stuff that can be done on Lightning with Taproot. It's just a question of priorities for the protocol and for those individual implementations. There is a C Lightning PR for like channel types. So like the approach that they're likely to take is to have different channel types. So perhaps like a Musig channel type for channels that are using Musig, and then upgrading to a new channel type that's perhaps a point time up contract rather than a hash time up contract. So there's definitely thought going on amongst the Lightning Protocol devs and implementations, but they probably need like an in-person protocol meeting or two to like figure out what order to implement some of these Taproot benefits in. But yeah, I suspect it will be paid to Taproot addresses first, then Musig support, and then potentially very far down the line, like point time up contracts rather than hash time up contracts. I think that was all my links. Any final thoughts? Was any of this interesting? Did everyone know this? Like so Fabian, like you're a core contributor. Like, have you been following all the Taproot stuff? Like, did you learn anything here? Is anything complicated to you, or are you kind of on top of all this Taproot stuff?
Yeah, I try. I try to review Andrew's PRs as well, and I mean, I organize the Socratics for Berlin, so we talk about, of course, about all the Taproot stuff there, and so yeah, Taproot is one of the main things that I'm excited about, and that I try to be helpful with the adoption of it and getting it forward. Currently, mainly through reviews. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are you optimistic for November that we'll have lots of exchanges, businesses, hardware wallets, maybe even miners supporting paying to Taproot addresses and receiving?
For November, I'm rather pessimistic, especially looking at exchanges. Like I guess from the Segwit era, I rather think like there's going to be a slow adoption, and as I mentioned, like I think Lightning is, even though they have a longer way to go, there's going to be a lot more effort there, a lot more motivation, a lot more development power allocated to it, and that's like where I expect to be like the most action over the next couple of months in terms of like Taproot adoption, discussion for Taproot, etc.
Anybody else? Any final thoughts on Taproot? It's really interesting. Thanks, Craig, for coming along, because it was great to get like an outside of core perspective trying to like implement this stuff. I think a few of us are like focused on core most of the time. We don't really know what it's like to implement this outside of core.
Yeah, sure. My biggest hope for Taproot in terms of what I hope it can bring is better privacy, particularly for multisig. And I think if we can see something like LND adopted, perhaps even as the default, then we can really get the kind of large anon set that we would need for that to happen. So that's kind of where I'm personally hoping to be able to benefit, apart from all the other things that it brings. So yeah, those are my kind of thoughts.
Yeah, and more resources. I've linked to a few Stack Exchange posts, but hopefully there'll be tutorials and videos and things like in the run up to November, so that there's some resources to look at when trying to implement this stuff on individual wallets and things. Okay, so unless anyone has any final thoughts, I'm not seeing any hands. we'll wrap up. Thanks a lot, everyone, for attending. And yeah, fingers crossed that we have some progress to observe in the ecosystem in the run up to November. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.